I want to welcome all of you to my talk on holding your team to high standards. And in a very big nutshell, this talk is going to teach you how to build very high performing teams without necessarily being a jerk to them or seeming like a jerk to them. So to start off, a few words about myself. My name is Yasia, and I'm a cloud engineering manager at Pega. I have over 10 years of industry experience, specifically in the IT field. This past year, I was named as part of top 100 women in cloud computing in Poland. And privately, I am a proud mom to a beautiful boy and just the cutest cat. So let's dive into my talk. And I'm going to start with a little story. So about how low standards are dangerous. When I started out my career, sometime in the beginning, I had a very absentee manager. And what that resulted in was that nobody on the team necessarily knew what direction we were supposed to be going into. There was no feedback about whether we're doing something wrong or something right. It was generally feeling like everyone was stagnating, and I for sure was. So when I became a manager, I vowed to myself that this will not be the case for me. I will take care of my people so well that they will love me so much and will never say bad things like that about me. And I did. I took such good care of my people that I put them on top of the business. Like the business went to the side and I focused on the people. As my life and career progressed, I found out that this is not working out either because the business is actually paying my people's salaries. So it was going back and forth in this fear of being too soft or being too hard that I think many of you will empathize with. This talk is a result of my experience and a result of a lot of research that I've done on the subject to get the balance just right. But before we get into that, I want to get some assumptions out of the way because I feel like this is something that many of you will be asking as the talk progresses. So the assumptions for this talk are as follows. Your team is meeting your expectations broadly, and they're already performing on par with minimal requirements. So this presentation shows how to get to excellence. So the bar is already on a good level, but you want them to go further. You want them to excel. You want them to be their best selves, yada, yada, yada. So this talk is going to be about that. And to start off, we're going to discuss 3 common pitfalls that a manager might find themselves in. And we're going to use an example that I think is pretty common in any industry of an employee coming to you and telling you, boss, this project might slip another week. One of the pitfalls, we're going to call it Fidelity, has such traits as high empathy, low standards, and low stress for the team. And I'm specifically highlighting the team part because the stress might be low for the team, but that's not necessarily going to be the case for you. So let's explore this Fidelity. Like, what would you sound like when you're in Fidelity? So an employee comes to you and says, boss, this project might slip another week. And you would go, oh, don't push yourself too hard on this. Even if it slips a month, it won't hurt. We're a big corporation, nothing gets done here anyway. Straight off the bat, this is too soft. You're not setting up your employee for success, and you are putting your business in danger because with that kind of statement, the project might slip another week. And that puts stress on you. Your employee feels, oh, I'm taking such good care of. I'm not being pushed, but actually it's a disservice to them as well because you're not allowing them to grow. They are going to stagnate bit by bit. On the other side of the spectrum is the second pitfall, and we'll call it severity. The traits of severity are as follows. It's going to be low empathy, high standards, and high stress for everyone around. And when you're in severity, the situation will play out a little differently. So your employee comes to you and says, boss, this project might slip another week. And you respond with something like, you really need to push yourself harder. By this point, you either need to cut down on scope or start actively chasing people to resolve their dependencies. You know our standards are too high to tolerate projects that slip week after week. And this is a little bit too hard for most people. So they feel like you're putting a lot of pressure on them. You're stressing them out. you're not necessarily listening to you. They're not necessarily listening to them about what they need, and you're not offering your support. So they might feel very stressed out at this point and feel that you're being kind of a jerk. So the third pitfall, we'll call it neglect. And traits of neglect will include low empathy, low standards, and no stress, partially because there might be no contact. So if you're in neglect, your employee comes to you with, boss, this project might slip another week. Your reaction might be nothing, right? So your employee will say, well, she didn't even show up for a one-on-one. I couldn't even get to her across that this is happening and this project is slipping up. The good news is neglect doesn't necessarily happen very often with people. Usually we oscillate between the first two pitfalls. So you might start out in severity and think, okay, my standards are very high. I want my people to perform well. And everybody comes to you and tells you, oh, you're too hard. I can't do this anymore. Can you please just relax, let me relax a little bit? I'm burning out. And little by little, you lower your standards up until the point of ending up in fidelity. And you're trying to make everyone comfortable, accommodate everyone. But at some point, you realize, okay, this is too low, even for my standards. Like I can't go any lower. So bam, you're going to be back in severity. So there is another state that ideally we want to get into, and we'll call it justice and love. So the traits of justice and love will be high empathy, high standards, no stress, but high pressure. So you want to put pressure on the people, but you want to take the stress away because that's the way that people are going to grow. Let's play out this situation, the same situation for someone who's in justice and love. So your employee comes to you and says, boss, this project might slip another week. And you respond with, you really need to push yourself harder. By this point, you either need to cut down on scope or start actively chasing people to resolve their dependencies. You know our standards are too high to tolerate projects that slip week after week. But that sounds like severity. How come it's not? Well, actually, what I showed you here, these 4 states, it's part of something that's called the standards devotion matrix. So these 4 boxes actually line up very neatly on an axis. And the axis names are horizontally and vertically the standards and devotion. So essentially what justice and love is a place of high standards and deep devotion. So if you go up the standards axis, you're increasing the standards. But then if you go horizontally, you're showing how deeply you care for your people. They need to feel that you are deeply devoted to their success. And if they do, and you have high standards for them, they're going to grow exponentially. Even if you tell them that something needs to be done, they're going to feel that you're doing that out of love, out of concern for their well-being, for their professional and career growth, etc. And that's how you end up in justice and love. So the question that I have for you, to take a little break from this lecture, I would like you to share in the chat, where is the default for you on the standards devotion matrix? Are you in severity? Are you being too hard on your people? Are you in fidelity? Is there a fidelity plus? Yes, absolutely. Like you can be very, very high down on that axis, very devoted to your people with low standards. Yeah, there might be fidelity plus. We have 2 people who are leaning towards fidelity at this point. And then maybe some of you are already in justice and love. Maybe some of you folks are in neglect. I find it that I'm in neglect sometimes when the projects and the product and everything just overwhelm me, and it's just easier to forget about the people. We're going to talk now about how to move to that promised land of justice and love. And there are actually two levers that help you get there. So if you find yourself in severity or neglect and you want to increase your devotion, you're going to do that through inquiry. And I'll break that down in just a little bit. And if you want to increase your standards, you're going to do that through feedback. So let's talk about that. How to get to justice in love. So if you're stuck in severity land, you will need to increase your devotion. And you will do that through inquiry and positive reinforcement. Well, let's start first. What's inquiry? Inquiry is nothing more than just asking questions. You're showing interest in the person, in what they're doing, in helping them, supporting them. So essentially asking questions, as many questions as you can. And remember that the currency of love is attention. So there are three types of inquiry. There's informational inquiry, supportive inquiry, and developmental inquiry. And informational inquiry will be kind of like, what are the top things you are focused on right now? Is there anything standing in your way? How is that particular project doing? So you see, it's kind of like getting the information. You're interested in what the person is doing currently at this point. So just showing that you care, showing that you're interested in whatever it is that they're doing. And then the next type is supportive inquiry. How can I help you be the most successful best self? How can I provide more opportunity for you? What can I do to unblock you? So this is showing that you are willing to give them support that they need to show where they want to get. And the last one is developmental inquiry. What effect did this project have on you? What would success look like for you? When you try to expand what you're doing, are you doing it for learning or to have more influence? So developmental inquiry is a little bit similar to coaching. So you're trying to get the person to reflect on what is happening in their career, in their minds, in anything with their life. Take all of those three together, and the person is going to feel like you really, truly care about what's going on with them and that you're deeply devoted to their success. That's increasing that devotion axis. Well, the other thing you can do is called positive reinforcement. And what's that? Positive reinforcement is essentially catching someone doing something well and asking them to do more of it in the future. So it will be very, very short. Usually about 12 seconds is enough to give positive reinforcement. And you will need to provide that all the time. The formula for that would be to highlight achievements, then to provide specific examples of what went well. And the third step will be to encourage repetition. Let's look at an example for this because that will make it easier to grasp and understand. You did great in the presentation. I want to point out the 3 things I found exceptionally awesome. So you're highlighting achievements, quite generally. Your organization was excellent. Your slides didn't distract from your points. You gave a clear call to action and deadline. So you're providing specific examples of what went well. Very, very specific. I'd love for you to reinforce these aspects in any future presentations and set an example to others around you. So you're encouraging repetition here. Well, you might be asking yourself, okay, what if they're doing everything wrong? And there isn't really anything I can find to give them positive reinforcement on. Here are 2 tips for that I would have for you. The first one is to pay closer attention. They must be doing something that warrants repetition. And that's kind of, maybe you find yourself in neglect and not noticing the things that they're actually doing very well. But if there's really, truly nothing that they're doing well, maybe you want to try to make sure that they see you publicly giving positive reinforcement that might be useful to them, to someone else. So you're seeing, okay, this person is doing something that I want that other person to be doing. Make sure that they witness you praising that other person for that particular bit. Here, we're going to pause for a little activity again. please share in the chat what are some practices that you can do to show devotion. Here's some homework for you. Come up with practices to show your devotion. 3 practices is enough. Maybe you can try writing some in the chat and get inspired. If not, just reflect when you get a chance on that. What if you're stuck in Fidelity land? In that case, you need to increase your standards. And how do you do that? Well, by setting clear expectations and giving feedback. So let's start with clear expectations. Clear expectations are essentially telling people what you want them to do and when you want them to do it and why you want them to do it. The formula is pretty simple for those, right? What you want done, when you want it done by, and why it needs to be done. And I'm not going to spend too much time here because there is actually a different webinar from WIMDI on this particular topic. It's setting clear expectations as a manager by Daryl Farrow, and Holly is going to post the link in the chat right now for you to take a look at it at your leisure at a later time. Instead, we're going to focus on something that's not covered in any of the WIMDI webinars yet, at least not from this perspective, and that's feedback. What's feedback? Well, there's a specific formula for feedback. And the formula for feedback goes like this. It's 5 to 1. That's the formula for feedback. Thank you. Thank you for coming to my talk. Goodbye. No, I'm just kidding. The formula for feedback is you have to give 5 times as much positive reinforcement as you do constructive advice. And positive reinforcement we have already covered previously. So now let's focus on constructive advice. What is that little thing? So constructive advice is essentially catching someone doing something a little bit not well and asking them to do it slightly differently. So usually at most 10 seconds is enough to give constructive advice. You would need to give constructive advice as soon as possible after you have noticed that behavior that needs alteration. And it has to be very specific. It can't be judgmental. It has to be developmental. So the formula for constructive advice is going to look like this. You point out the things that should be done differently. You provide specific non-judgmental examples, and you ask to do it differently in the future. So let's look at an example for that. Let's practice constructive advice. And an example for this is going to be me giving my friend John some feedback about his recent presentation. So I start off with, John, I'm going to point out one thing I think you could do a little differently during your presentation. I'm pointing out the things that should be done differently. Your final section was, vote for the Putikitiki bird as the bird of the century, because it is a magnificent bird with beautiful feathers and a delightful call. I'm providing specific non-judgmental example of what needs to be changed. You could try rephrasing that with, the Putikitiki bird is a magnificent bird. Its feathers are beautiful. Its call is delightful. Vote for Putikitiki bird for bird of the century. I'm providing a specific non-judgmental example of how it could be improved. This way, your statement will end with a clear and powerful call to action, leaving a lasting impression on your audience. I'd like you to be mindful of what effect you would like to achieve on your audience in the future. Okay, and by this point, I know what all of you are wondering, but what does this bird look like? And Holly and I got you covered. Here it is. Look at that. Look at that beautiful bird. Look at that mane of feathers. Look at how it's carrying its children on its back. Look at that. It's golden hours, and it's still floating in the water. Okay, for those of you who are not in on the joke yet, there's this comedian, John Oliver, and he recently, in true American fashion, interfered with foreign elections. This time in New Zealand, they were choosing the bird of the century, and John put up posters in Mumbai and Tokyo on the most those busy crossings, asking people to vote for this bird, and it did win. You're looking at the bird of the century. Ladies and gentlemen, it won by a landslide. Got like 10 times as many votes as the 10 birds like that came after it. Okay, with that little icebreaker, let me give you some homework, more homework. So practice giving constructive advice at least once a week. What's useful here is that you can actually find someone that you trust, you have a good relationship with, and tell them, you know what, I need to practice giving this constructive advice because I'm not really good at that. Could you help me practice, please? Straight away, that will take some of the awkwardness out of it. And if you fail spectacularly and make them mad or something, they won't feel as bad because they know you're just practicing, you're just trying it all out. So I know I gave you a lot of content. So let's try to put this all together. And I'll put this all together in a different geometric figure. I'm sure women in male-dominated industries like math just as much as I do and love geometry just as much as I do. Pretty much any talk of mine has some sort of shapes, triangles, circles, whatnot. Well, this is the high performance pyramid. And it goes like this. So you start with the foundation of inquiry and positive reinforcement. So you ask a lot of questions to show how deeply devoted you are to a person's success, and you provide them with positive reinforcement. So you're giving them all of that positive reinforcement to make the foundation for the constructive advice that you're going to be giving them later on. Remember that 5-to-1 formula. So if you want to give positive constructive advice once a week, you need to give positive reinforcement once a day. If you want to give constructive advice once a month, you want to give positive reinforcement once a week, and so on. But the key here is the fact that constructive advice needs to happen as soon as possible after that event has occurred. So for that to be effective, you already need to have built up that foundation of positive reinforcement. So just give it all the time possible, and you will have that foundation and credibility that whenever you're pointing out something that's not quite right, it's not like you're only nitpicking and noticing the small things. You're also noticing the good things. So the middle layer is the expectations. Make sure to set them as clearly as possible so that people actually know what it is that you expect them to do. And the last bit is feedback. So again, positive reinforcement, but also constructive advice to stir the person in the right direction. And if you want to take anything out of this talk, remember these two shapes. These two shapes, the standards devotion matrix and the high performance pyramid. So take them, memorize them. That's a good point to take a screenshot and use them to the best of your ability. So with that, I am going to show you some of my sources and talk a little bit about those. So the standards devotion matrix actually comes from a book called Unleashed by Francis Ryan and Morris. And their work derives from memorable deeds and sayings by this Roman philosopher Valerius Maximus. The 5-to-1 ratio is the magic relationship ratio of the Gottman Institute. And that works not just for your professional life, it works for your personal life as well. So you can try that out with your partner, with your spouse. And then there's also setting clear expectations as a manager, which is a WIMDI webinar that Holly already shared the link to. If you want some additional reading on the subject, I suggest checking out The Feedback Fallacy by Marcus Buckingham. For the sake of brevity, I did not include any data from that book here, but I do recommend it as additional reading. And with that, I invite you to stay in touch with me, add me on my LinkedIn. I will try to answer your questions if you have any.